Many in the West have been vilifying or shaming India for its voting patterns in the United Nations General Assembly in matters related to Ukraine. Yes, illegal annexation of a country's regions by another country is wrong, absolutely wrong. The use of force by a nation to redraw the borders of another also sounds wrong. Of course, it is wrong when Russia does it, but is it also wrong when the USA does it or when Americans support it?
Please read these words very carefully. America's annexation of Hawaii. These are not my words. These words were published on the official website of the US Department of State, which is currently headed by this man. And now let's read something else on this website. Again, the US Department of State, right? Here it clearly explains how the US used the war against Spain as a pretext to annex the independent state of Hawaii. Please pay attention to these words. Annex the independent state of Hawaii. Yes, the United States annexed an independent nation which it even had a diplomatic relation with. Can you believe that? Unfortunately, the independent state of Hawaii decided to trust the USA. It even concluded a treaty of friendship with the US. But several decades later, it was illegally annexed by the US. However, the illegal annexation of Hawaii wasn't achieved just like that. There were years of calculated planning by the Americans. Yes, as it usually happens, Hawaii's so-called friendship or its diplomatic relations with the US also meant that Hawaii had become a target or a fertile ground for the American Christian missionaries. You can read about this here. The American Christian missionaries' hard work and planning brought results. Gradually, many aspects of Hawaii's traditional culture were prohibited, including teaching the Hawaiian language and performing the native hula dance. Finally, armed naval forces from the United States invaded the sovereign Hawaiian nation. Take a look at this visual evidence. But that's not everything. Native Hawaiian citizens protested. A mass petition drive was organized, signed by more than 21,000 native Hawaiian people, which was a clear majority. But of course, their hopes and voices were brutally crushed by the US. One of the reasons for the illegal annexation of Hawaii was that the islands were strategically valuable as a mid-Pacific fueling station and naval installation for the US. This act by the US was a clear violation of international law. It was a clear violation of treaties between the two nations. It's not me who is saying this. Read this here. The US government officially admitted to their crimes 100 years after they annexed Hawaii illegally. But too little, too late. See where the US is. See where Hawaii is. Even today, Hawaii remains with the US. The religion of native Hawaiians has been crushed, subjugated, or damaged irreversibly. Their culture and language have been damaged irreversibly through Americanization. And Hawaii's demographics have been permanently altered. Take a look at this. These are native Hawaiians' sacred sites, a place of religious importance to them, taken over or mutilated by Americans. The US has even built telescopes on it. So may I ask, does the illegal annexation of Hawaii and the violation of international law do justice to the values and principles that the US preaches to the world? Point 2. Illegal annexation by other nations that the US supports. Please take a look at this map. That's Syria. That's Israel, right? And over here, pay attention to this area. Now very carefully read this report from the United Nations. See the date, September 2022. Alright, now read this. In 1981, through a dedicated law, Israel annexed the occupied Syrian Golan. The Security Council has definitively rejected that act as unlawful. Only the United States of America has recognized the purported annexation. Hello USA, you are supporting unlawful annexation here. Now, what happened to your rules-based international order? That was the first example. Now the second example. Back in 2020, the US recognized Morocco's annexation of Western Sahara. Here, once again, the US can be seen supporting a flagrant violation of international law. Point 3. Territorial acquisitions of the United States. These are the territorial acquisitions of the United States. Source: US Department of the Interior. Please take a good look. See how the US expanded. Allow me to give you at least one example. See this area over here, the Mexican Cession. It was controlled by Mexico. So the US fought a war against Mexico, and then eventually in this treaty, Mexico had to give up 55% of its territory to the United States. Can you imagine that? Mexico was reduced to less than half of what it was, and the US got bigger and bigger. And let's not forget the actual owners of this land. Let's not forget the destruction of the Native American land, which has almost disappeared. Point 4. The USA has been shouting that it supports democracy and freedom around the world, but many Americans have no idea that this democratic USA brutally colonized the Philippines for decades. In the Philippines, this democratic USA even established its own military government and appointed an American military governor. But how did that happen? Allow me to explain that. The freedom fighters of the Philippines wanted independence from the Spanish colonial empire. They hoped the Americans would genuinely help them in their independence movement against Spain. But guess what? The USA went on to backstab the freedom fighters of the Philippines and instead purchased their country from Spain for the sum of $20 million. When Spain surrendered, Filipino diplomats were not even invited to treaty negotiations. I mean, one colonizer illegally purchasing a country from another colonizer. To any rational mind, giving money to illegally purchase a country would sound like human trafficking, land trafficking, human rights violation, and many other serious crimes all combined in one. But for this democratic USA, it was legal and normal. But what happened next is something that the Philippines will never forget. Philippine-American War. An estimated 20,000 Filipino soldiers and up to 1 million civilians died. Many civilians in the Philippines were even forced into concentration camps. Many couldn't survive the hunger, violence, disease, and famine. Finally, in 1946, when the USA granted independence to the Philippines after exploiting and destroying the country in the war, it offered the Philippines a so-called financial support for post-war development. But mind you, in exchange, the Philippines needed to allow US companies and citizens rights to the island's natural resources as well as free use of military zones. According to Professor Adrian de Leon, despite formal independence, the Philippines remained a neo-colony of the United States. But perhaps even hypocrisy, democracy, and irony were all laughing at each other when this man, William Howard Taft, who ran the colonial government that the United States established in the Philippines several years later, ended up becoming the president of the USA. But for a country whose some of the founding fathers and presidents were slave owners, William Taft becoming the president wasn't a big deal. And guess what? Back then, the American media was busy explaining to Americans how the USA was civilizing the people of the Philippines. Please pause and carefully see this visual evidence. Filipino before and Filipino after. Point 5. Americans need to understand that today many Indians are hurt or unsettled by what is happening in Ukraine, but because of the USA's poor track record that I have highlighted, Indians can't blindly follow the USA's selfish geopolitical goals or the US-led West. But many people in the West, due to their limited understanding or due to their media propaganda, continue to blame Indians and vilify India and its democracy. Between Ukraine and Russia, whose side is India on? Well, India's Minister of External Affairs has already answered that.
Madam President, as the Ukraine conflict continues to rage, we are often asked, whose side are we on? And our answer, each time, is straight and honest. India is on the side of peace and will remain firmly there. We are on the side that respects the UN Charter and its founding principles. We are on the side that calls for dialogue and diplomacy as the only way out. We are on the side of those struggling to make ends meet, even as they stare at the escalating costs of food, of fuel, and fertilizers.
People in the West should remember that the Ukrainian president has thanked India's Prime Minister for India's support of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and has noted the significant humanitarian aid provided by the government and the private sector of the Republic of India to Ukraine. All this is in official Ukrainian government records. You can read that here. Yes, even after all the slander and blame, India and Indians continue to serve and help the people of Ukraine. USA, please learn from India how countries can be helped without stealing or taking over their natural resources. Point 6. It has been observed that regime change has been an integral part of US foreign policy for more than 100 years, and the United States has not hesitated to overthrow governments that stood in the way of its political and economic goals. This book claimed that the United States has toppled 14 foreign governments. Many Americans or Westerners may not know that, but it clearly seems that India's foreign policy makers are well aware of that. Even among the objectives of this lesson from a US government department, it is mentioned how US imperialism affected the people and landscape of foreign territories. Yes, one can criticize Russia for annexing territories that were with Ukraine, but as a responsible global community, let's not overlook what is happening in other parts of the world. It is well documented how the US has grabbed or stolen land and natural resources, and how it has built its foundation on money earned through slavery. But today, the US is rich and powerful, so it can say and claim whatever it wants. It can also say that it is the champion of freedom, and it can also say that it is an ideal democracy. Many around the world don't agree with the United States, but they can't object or do anything because perhaps they are just afraid of the United States. And that is why, for many Indians, USA's democracy is just all about USA's hypocrisy. See you again.